Hi, and welcome back to the Beyond Failure podcast.
It's been a minute.
Yeah. I'm your host, Elizabeth Horvick. Sorry, I just really wanted to say
You do have a great voice for that. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute.
It's been a wild ride, y'all.
Yeah.
We don't even have to dive into why, I don't think, right now.
No, I think it's just life, literally.
Yeah.
Running a few businesses when the economy is in a tough spot is not for the faint of heart. I'll just leave it at that. I think that's it. We don't need to go all into the ins and outs of running our businesses or anything. But yeah, it's just been tough, and I think we realized we should have made it clear, but we'll make it clear now when we say, if, the first thing that's going to be put on the back burner when our schedules get really busy and when they get filled up is going to have to be this podcast, unfortunately, but we will do it when we can.
Yeah, it's so hard because we really do value this. And
yeah, of course.
Part of what we want to talk about is a lot of the things that we're currently experiencing in our business, in our relationship, in our life. And so it has been challenging the last, 4 or 5 weeks or however long it's been since we put something else out. Because we're like,
about a month probably.
I know we want and need to talk about these things.
We want to do the podcast.
But we're right in the middle of them. So thank y'all for having patience and grace for our process too.
Yeah. Yeah, but we have been wanting to do, for this episode, we've been wanting to talk about mental health because that's such a big, important part of overall health. And so we've been really excited to dive into that a bit and talk about some of the things that we've done, some tools that we've utilized to get to a better place mentally. And yeah, they've helped us, I think, tremendously and are a huge
100%.
part of our journey. And we love sharing with other people, our friends and family, and talking about it. So that's what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, I think these tools that we'll talk about have been some of the major factors in our life and in our relationship that have allowed us to be entrepreneurs and have creative pursuits and endeavors and I guess somewhat hold it together emotionally and mentally in the midst of massive amounts of stress and anxiety and just obstacles in our way, business and relational and family and otherwise.
Yeah, I think we can be completely 100% honest when we say that it's definitely an ongoing practice because
1,000,000%.
I think we are in some of the hardest years that we ever have been and ever will be. And it's just setting the foundation of our life, if you will. It's starting things over and over, and when they don't work, it's pivoting and pivoting and pivoting again and again and again, and it's very difficult, and so it's going to be extremely trying. And I think to an extent that's part of why we haven't recorded this episode, because we've been in the thick of it,
literally walking those things out,
and we knew our next one was going to be on mental health, and it was like, I have to be in a place to be able to, okay, I'm okay, so I'm going to share from that place of being okay.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not always easy, and I want to, be transparent about that.
Yeah.
I want to be honest always about the fact that, it's been really tough this last few years, and, we're hanging in there, we're doing all right, but it's hard. It's really hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And so, of course, everything we talk about, just even with physical health, it's an ongoing practice, and it's something you need to constantly remember to put into play in your own life. So,
that's one thing I was going to say too, and you kind of alluded to it, was just like we did talk about nutrition, we talked about some of the physical health things. We are never coming from this place of arrival, and that's kind of the point of what we're saying right now is we're walking it out currently. All of these tools for, emotional healing and physical healing and all of these things, we're in the midst of being faced with tension, faced with anxiety, and having these choices to operate with those tools, to utilize the things that we've learned or not. And so we're very much so in the midst of that battle and want to communicate from that place. It's never from look, we figured it out and we've got it down. You should too. We're in that fight with y'all for sure.
Yeah. So a little backstory on my mental and emotional health, I guess, which I feel like we touched on maybe in the first episode a bit, and it kind of ties into the diagnosis I got with that mutation or whatever. But I grew up very, very, very anxious and depressed, and my childhood was just tough. Like we went through a lot of stuff as a family, and my siblings and I, as a little unit, were very close because we went through so much together. But I think, well, now I realize I don't know how much of it was from the mutation, because apparently anxiety and depression play a pretty big part, or are a big factor of this mutation. And obviously my family and I were not aware of that mutation our whole, like, up until just a year or two ago.
Yeah.
So that's a very new finding. But yeah, to make a longer story short, I grew up very much struggling, like struggling hardcore. I was a young kid and I remember being very depressed. Like I just struggled so much, and it got so bad to the point where I definitely like contemplated suicide, which is crazy and so sad to think about, and
Gosh, yeah.
look back on, like being an 8-year-old kid and just being in that bad and that dark of a place. And thankfully I never, actually attempted suicide or, went there, but I just had a lot of pent up anger, pent up pain,
Mm,
mainly pain, um, that I didn't know how to deal with, and
yeah.
that my family didn't know how to deal with themselves, and how to help me deal with it
Yeah.
as a kid. And, we grew up in the early 2000s when there just, again, wasn't kind of like the the physical health stuff or the food stuff. It's like there wasn't a lot of language for this type of
Yeah.
stuff,
Right.
and counseling was still kind of seen as voodoo and stuff. And, my parents put us in um counseling, talk therapy when we were young and when they first got divorced. And it was just very surface. We would go to the school counselors and stuff like that, but it was just very surface. That's the best way I can describe it. It didn't do what I needed it to do. It didn't deliver me from my pain or help me process
Yeah.
a lot of the like huge emotions that I was experiencing. So, um I'm grateful for it because I don't know where I would have been without it or
Sure.
what it did save me from, but it just wasn't the extent that I needed.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So, my dad is a licensed clinical social worker. He got his master's degree in social work, and I always wanted to be his guinea pig when he was like, wanting to test stuff out on us. I was mainly like middle school, high school age, when he was really kind of, learning a lot, going to like Anthony Robbins conferences and
Yeah.
just like learning a lot and soaking a lot in himself. Um, he would be like, "I learned this new thing," and I'd be like, "Sign me up, I wanna try it,"
Here I
like
am.
yeah, like, "Here I am, use me, shit can't get any worse," like I'm sure that it could, I know that it could, but at the time, that's how I felt. I have everything to
Gain and
gain
yeah.
and nothing to lose, exactly. I'm not really good with phrases, and Philip knows that, so he's helping me out, thank you. So, yeah, I was always, like, very excited, like, who knows what could work? Who
Right.
knows what could make me feel better,
If
like
there's any ounce of relief, sign me up.
yeah, definitely. I think, like, we also didn't have a lot of language for what was going on. I just knew that I wasn't happy, like, I knew that I hated life, basically, and that life could get better. Like, I was like, "Surely it's possible to get better," right?
Right.
Like it's not this, it shouldn't be this horrible. And so I didn't have a lot of language. I didn't know exactly what was going on with me. I just knew that I didn't feel great, and I was always down to try to feel better, try things out to feel better anyway. Um and so yeah, basically as my dad was introduced to things and concepts and therapies and exercises and things you could do, um I was introduced to them and my siblings were introduced to them. And so, two of the things that really I feel like were game changing, and this was around the time that Philip and I were dating. and knew we wanted to get married, but also knew that we had a lot of baggage and knew that we
Mhm.
had a lot of things to work through on our own individually before we were going to come together and start a family or just like be a
A unit,
unit.
yeah.
Yeah. Um and so when we were dating, we really faced a lot of challenges. I think we, came together and it was like amazing and beautiful and perfect in so many ways, but also like
Brutal.
very obvious that there's going to be a lot of shit we
Yeah,
have to deal with,
yeah,
especially if we want to make this work long term. And so we, it was a very obvious to us. I mean, we
yeah,
were just struggling so much. Like, needed to learn how to communicate together. You didn't grow up
yeah.
communicating, and I grew up maybe at least in my later years like over communicating, and that was a tough matchup.
Sure.
And I just remember my dad introducing us to two specific therapies that when he introduced us to them, we were like, we're doing this.
Yeah.
Like, and
At all any cost, like, yeah.
yeah. And um I mention my dad a lot when I talk about this stuff because he's the reason for it. I
Yeah.
mean, he helped us so much, not just in introducing us to it, but excuse me, um, helping us
Like,
financially, like
facilitating
yeah,
the connections.
facilitating
Yeah.
exactly like the places we were gonna go to get these therapies, and like he really, really helped us, and we're
Yeah.
always so, so grateful for him, to him for that. But yeah, so those two therapies that I'm talking about are called EMDR, which is short for let's see if I can remember it. Okay, so it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And basically what it does, I'm going to do like very shortened version of what these therapies are so that cuz one, I'm not a licensed clinical,
Right.
you know, therapist or anything. And also it's just not that fun to go into like all the like nitty gritty
Yeah, and the
and
science
whatever.
behind everything
Yeah,
outside
like I
of,
don't want
yeah.
to bore anyone with that.
Right.
The gist of it is that it mimics basically what your brain does during REM sleep, REM sleep. It is when during REM sleep is when your brain processes through the day's events.
Yeah.
Um and so what EMDR does is it mimics that bilateral stimulation of when you're in REM sleep, your eyes are moving and it triggers the brain to process.
Mhm.
And so EMDR is basically having a somebody who's certified to do this, guiding you through basically you can focus on some like, undealt with trauma or just painful memories. Doesn't You don't even have to call it trauma,
Yeah.
but just some kind of painful memory. If you can't get through a story without crying, or you can just tell there's a tinge of pain when you talk about something, that's a good sign that you haven't processed through it fully. And so basically you will do something that triggers that bilateral movement. You can hold paddles, which is mainly what I did. I don't know if that's what you did during yours.
So I did both. I did the paddles and I also did the light bar.
Yeah, so the paddles are basically little paddles that you hold onto in each hand, and they'll vibrate back and forth. And it's basically just triggering, like I said, that bilateral stimulation. And or you can I liked to do the paddles because I liked to close my eyes. I feel like I already naturally
Mhm.
process with my eyes closed a lot, and so I tended to like that more, but I did try the light bar as well, which is basically just a light bar that goes back and forth, and it's basically the same thing. It's just triggering that back and forth so that you can let the brain know, "Hey, we're going to process now."
Yeah.
And so we both did that at the same time. We did couples therapy, like premarital counseling, kind of
Mhm.
just like preparation on like how to communicate and how to be the best version of ourselves for each other and for our
Right.
own selves. And at the same time did EMDR individually. And
we also did, I think, like we did the couples therapy with our therapist, and then we also did some like loose kind of premarital therapy with our pastor at the time as well.
Or we didn't really do it with him, but we did the like Danny Silk stuff or whatever. We did some we were also in church, yeah, which is where we met, and that's a whole other story. Yeah, we basically were just like, dude, we know we have issues. We're gonna dedicate our everything. Yeah, like we're throwing everything at this because we want to make this work. And I come from a family that has a lot of divorce, and I knew that I didn't want that. I knew that I wasn't going to get married just to get divorced. So I was like, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna really do this, and I feel like I want to. So let me make sure that it's gonna work.
Yeah.
And I also you have a lot of, marriage in your family, but not really many examples of marriage that we would want to do it like. We just didn't have many examples of marriages that we felt like, yeah, I can like be gung-ho about that and and be really excited to do this for the rest of my life. Like it was a very, very big deal to us, basically, is what I'm getting at.
Very serious decision.
Yeah. And we did not take it lightly by any means. And I think our life and what we chose to do it makes that pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then the other thing which came shortly after EMDR is neurofeedback. And neurofeedback is very interesting. It basically it starts off with a QEEG, which they use those in hospitals to like check brain activity and stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of people may be familiar with what a Q is, but basically they check where your brain is at and how it's functioning. Basically, they just check the different brain waves and like what are these waves doing and what are these doing here, and they can basically read exactly what's going on. So you can't bullshit this, which I love.
Yeah.
Because you don't know how much of what you're doing or saying is subconscious. Like you're like, no, I'm not that bad, but like inside you're really bad and freaking out.
Because we kind of operate on autopilot so often.
Definitely.
Someone's like, hey, how you doing? I'm fine. And it's of course that's like a normal response when you're talking to people. Like not everyone wants to meet someone. Like, hey, how you doing? Like actually it's really fucked up right now, and like life is horrible. It's like there's obviously some societal standards, right? But it's like this. Cut through all the robotic responses that we have, and it's like, no, literally, you might tell me you're fine, but your brain's going ape shit right now.
Exactly. Yes. And during your initial test, like they'll put you through different like quote unquote common stressors. And so it's basically to try to get a rise out of you, because it's like what happens when something stressful happens. Like what is your brain doing, But also like I knew that going through that was good for me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like I knew I'm glad I was like, I'm glad I'm going through something triggering, because in order to deal with it, it needs to come to the surface. Neurofeedback basically is that seeing exactly where your brain is, seeing what its coping mechanisms are, and then retraining it to do what you want it to do. Which is so very cool. It's such a great concept.
Crazy.
We did ours with Mark S. Jones, I believe. There's two like well-known Mark Jones in San Antonio, but this one is very well known for neurofeedback, and he has been doing it for I don't know how many years, and we're just so blessed by him and so grateful for all the work that he's done in that field. So he's the one that looked at our scans and was able to develop a protocol for us to retrain our brains, and sometimes it's getting more of a specific wave. Sometimes it's suppressing waves when there's too much or they're too high.
Hyperactivity.
Exactly. And there's eyes closed protocols, there's eyes open protocols. There's like, it's very fascinating. If any of this sounds interesting to you, please look into it, because I feel like before these therapies, we did not know that they were a possibility. Like we didn't know that there was very real things scientifically proven
Yeah.
that completely change
Yeah.
your
And
psychology.
I needed things too that cut through the bullshit because I knew, especially with my upbringing that we'll get into, like, I can't just have someone that says, "How are you feeling?" and I
Yeah.
tell you what I'm feeling,
Yeah.
and then we do something based on that. I needed that
Mm-hmm.
science. I needed something to tell me, like, no, you don't realize you're responding, like your brain is responding to tension in this way without you even knowing about it. I
Right.
might think I'm calm, but I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Like what I have thought for so many years was normal and like calm and collected. And like, yeah, I'm communicating clearly, but
Yeah.
like my biochemistry and
Mm-hmm.
like my hands are hot and
Yeah.
like all these things that are happening, my heart rate's elevated, these certain brain waves are going crazy, and I literally had no idea that my body was responding in that way.
Which I'm glad you brought that up because I did want to make sure to touch on that too. During neurofeedback, I was able to do biofeedback as well,
Yeah.
which they can just basically check like how you're breathing, if it's shallow or if it's deep, your sweat response,
Yeah.
how cold and how warm your hands are, um, all those things that are tied to stress. And I mean, it was very cool because my hands were always cold, like not really clammy, but just like I don't think I would sweat a lot, but they were just
Mhm.
always cold. Like I wouldn't get good circulation to them
Sure.
because I was always so uptight. And I was able to work on that. Like it's very interesting to just like trigger exactly where in your brain it needs to be triggered to say, "Hey, I'm okay right now. I'm not going to die." And like my hands can be warm right now
Right.
type of thing.
Right.
I guess we didn't even say with neurofeedback what ends up happening, like the way that your brain knows to do this is mine was eyes closed, what I mainly needed to work on. And so I would close my eyes and there would be a sound, like some kind of music or whatever you want to listen to that plays full, like at full what volume
Yeah.
when your brain is doing what it's supposed to do. And then it like goes out when it's doing the opposite of what it's meant to do. So it's very annoying because you just know, like your brain knows, I want to hear this song. Or if your eyes are open, I want to watch this movie. But it's not going to be clear until you're getting exactly what you want your brain
The
to do
proper
out of it.
activity within those waves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, super cool.
Mine was babbling brook. So I did eyes closed too. And I had this I would always say is this babbling brook in my ears, and I'm closing my eyes and you just whatever a babbling brook sounds like.
Mhm.
But it would keep cutting out and then coming back and it would be real quiet. And
Mhm.
then you would just like try to settle into it and listen
Yeah.
to it, whatever. And it's really interesting because you can't force anything. You
You
have
can't.
to remove yourself and
Yeah.
let your brain do what it was designed to do,
Mhm.
which is kind of a terrifying experience. I like to be in control of a lot of things. And so it's like, I like to be able to say, here's a solution, let me work at it and I'll be better at it.
Mhm.
And this kind of takes that out of the picture a little bit. And it's just like, be there, let your
Right.
brain do what it's supposed to do and train it like a muscle.
Exactly. It literally is like that.
Yeah.
It's like a muscle. And yeah, I was going to say both of these therapies. So by the time you're done with EMDR, to jumping back to EMDR, um, it was very weird the first couple of times because I remember like going through the triggering memory and all
Mm.
that stuff. And then at the end, the therapist asked me, like, okay, so how does it feel now when you try to focus on that memory? And I couldn't think of it. And it was like really bothering me. Like
Mm-hmm.
for a second, like I don't know. It was just like I don't feel anything
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
Which kind of bothered me because I was like, I've always felt sad about that.
Yeah.
I've always felt hurt by that. I've always been annoyed about that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I just feel nothing. And they were like, good. And I was
Like, is
like,
that
is
it?
that good?
It's so unfamiliar
It's
though.
so
Yeah.
unfamiliar, and that's what it is. And I think with all of these therapies that we're talking about, it it can be very different to be free. Like,
Scary.
yeah, in a way scary
Yeah.
because it's foreign and it's so different from what you're used to. but also like you're free. And so after those 2 therapies, I feel like we really were different. I mean, we were really
Black
different.
and white.
Yeah, and I feel like we owe a lot of it to those tools and to my dad, but it was like we knew exactly what we needed. We knew we were good together,
Yeah.
and we knew we just need a little bit of help.
Yeah.
And if we can get that little bit of help, I think we'll be good.
Yeah.
And when we did,
Bro.
it was it. That was all we needed. And then we just vibed so much better. It
Mhm.
was like we communicate well. And of course, that's an ongoing process. Like,
For sure.
we're still
100%.
actively working on communicating well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an ongoing thing with any couple. But, um, I mean, it just allowed us to be the versions of ourselves that we knew we actually were meant to be.
Yeah.
And operate from that place and love each other from that place, and it was just very powerful. So by the time we got married, we were very confident that like we've got this
Yeah.
and we can do this and we want to do this.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to choose you every day. Um there's also something called somatic experiencing, which is very cool, and that goes a little bit into like our survival instincts as animals. And there's some really cool videos you can look up that like show a polar bear going through like a fight or flight experience where it basically shakes after it's gone through like this scary thing where it
Mhm.
feels like it almost died or whatever, and it shakes and it like shakes out the trauma
Mhm.
basically. And so somatic experiencing or mimics that, or kind of like goes through that experience where I feel like as humans we don't process through the things that are affecting us.
Yeah.
And somebody, I forgot who it was. Oh, I think it was in the Selena Gomez documentary, but she was talking about how she's very passionate about like changing or bringing this into school curriculum where
Mhm.
like in kindergarten we're like, how do you feel, like sunshine, rainbow, and like, or are you having a rainy day type of thing.
Yeah.
And then like I don't know, around second grade it's just like gone, like
Yeah.
there's not much of a conversation about it. And she was talking about that and I really resonated with that because I was like, yeah, we just don't have the tools, and
Yeah.
we do have the tools but we don't know about them. And
Yeah.
especially our kids, like what we teach them is so much like, okay, from here to here, there's this big disconnect.
Spectrum and yeah.
Yeah, this disconnect that happens where like we're going to talk about your feelings and then all of a sudden you have to grow your ass up and
Mhm.
like don't talk about
Throw
it.
you
And
out into the world
especially
and just
men, it's this whole thing,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if we can just learn how to process while the thing is happening, if you're going through anything, a death in the family, or you lost a friend, or like anything traumatic, you got in a car accident, like you're, going through a divorce, like any number of things
Yeah.
that can happen. This life can be very difficult.
Yeah.
If we can just know that these tools exist and process while we're going through it,
Right.
we will be so much better off. And our kids will be so much better off. And our
Everyone around
families will
us,
be so
yeah.
much better off. Exactly. Because we will be dealing with it in a healthy manner,
Yeah.
not bottling it up. I used to bottle it up. That's all I used to
100%.
do. I internalized all of it and it came out in the form of anger, insecurity, bitterness, frustration, hatred. Like it was just like all dark. It
Yeah.
was all bad vibes because I was hurting so much and
Yeah.
I had so much pent up pain. It was all stemming from unprocessed and undealt with pain. And yeah, when you can like just learn how to process through the pain, it's a whole new
And
life.
just be. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like I think I became really aware of all of the mechanisms that I've used and that the people around me use in order to feel okay and to feel
Mhm.
safe in their
Mhm.
environments, whether it is anger or sarcasm or humor, like all of these things, or whether it's isolation, the way that they pull back. I started to become really aware of, with family and friends and coworkers and stuff like that, where I was like, oh, that's why you like always have to be the loudest one in the room, or that's
Mhm.
why you escape in the midst of tension and stuff like that. And I feel like it also, on the other side, outside of just my own healing throughout these processes, it also gave me a lot of empathy for people that were the exact same way that I was. I'm like, oh,
100%.
I can see you just trying to be funny to cover up the fact you're super uncomfortable right now
Mhm.
in your skin. And I would do that all the time.
Yeah.
I used to
Right.
just cover everything with humor. Everything's a joke.
Yeah.
Everything's sarcastic, and it can be mean. It can be really off putting.
For sure.
And yeah, for sure, gave me a
Yeah.
lot more empathy.
Yeah, I think the concept that, like, it's still a concept that kind of not bothers me, but something that I think about where, like, you don't know what you don't know,
Yeah,
and you don't know how much of your reactions, your responses, like who you are as a person and how you interact with others is
yep,
subconscious. That
yep,
shit freaks me out. Like, I don't want to be on autopilot. I
yeah,
don't want to be living my life on autopilot. I want to be very intentional with who
yes,
I am, with the way that I communicate, with the way that I love people, with how I show up to my jobs and to the people that I love. Like, I can get emotional talking
yeah,
about that, but it's because, like, this life and me deserve so much more
yeah,
than to just be going, and I don't want to be a slave to my own life. And so that concept
mm,
keeps me very curious and always willing to try things that might help me improve,
yeah,
because
yeah,
I'm a firm believer that you always can be better. You
yeah,
can always be a better version of yourself, and I want to be the best. I want to love others. I want to love you. I want to love the people that I love so freaking gosh darn well.
yeah, and yourself.
Yeah, you can only love others, I believe, or you can
How
only
much
love
you?
others to the capacity that you love yourself.
Yeah, yeah,
And I really had to learn to love myself because I
mm,
I came from absolutely hating myself.
yeah,
And once I got that concept that, like, I'll only be able to love God and love other people to the capacity that I love myself, I was like, I'm going to fix this.
yeah,
Like, because if I don't care about myself enough yet, I care about the people around me enough to fight for this
yeah,
and to be the best version of myself. So, yeah, I think there is still, I mean, a lot to talk about when it comes to
yeah,
mental health, but these are the biggest tools that I feel like really helped us.
mm-hmm.
Just, yeah, I'm so grateful.
Beyond grateful. I mean, my story is kind of in line with yours because a lot of the things we experienced at the same time, and
Hmm.
because, like you said, because of your dad and some of the resources and connections that allowed us to have access to. But I think, I guess, pieces of my story too can bring some more clarity and even some other opportunities to people too, just in how I got access to them, because I got access to some of these tools in some creative ways,
Hmm.
that maybe would help some people too. But I mean,
Yeah.
growing up, very similar, extremely anxious. It kind of ties into why fitness was such an outlet for me.
Hmm.
Is I would encounter a situation with a lot of tension and a lot of anger with
Hmm.
my family growing up, and I would escape. So
Hmm.
I would run out to our shed and I'd work out, and
Yeah.
it would be pouring rain and I'd just be crying doing lap pull downs or
Hmm.
something. It was like one of the few ways that I got a really good mental and emotional release. And so that was kind of part of the equation for me. But extremely anxious. I think in my family too, like I grew up in a very religious, conservative,
Hmm.
Southern Texas family. And I think because of that, all of your like healing and everything is kind of wrapped up in religion and in church. And I want to be very honest, but also like I'm not trying to, you know,
Hurt
hurt
feelings, or
feelings or
yeah.
ruffle feathers or whatever. But it was just very clear that there was a lot of very broken people, a lot of very broken circumstances seeking solely for healing within this circle.
Yeah.
And it was pretty obvious to me that there was a lot of like depth of trauma that
Mhm.
needed to be worked out underneath the surface.
I mean, to an extent, isn't that what we're all doing,
1,000,000%.
you know? Like,
Yeah.
we're all subconsciously trying to find answers.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. And so growing up very anxious, I think it manifested itself in a lot of different ways, but it would always kind of end up labeling me as either lazy or,
Mhm.
I mean, messy. A lot of these
Like, it
things,
got you labeled.
yeah, it got
Yeah.
me labeled these things where, and I guess I could say I was in those moments because of the anxiety. It was
Yeah.
very difficult for me to like pursue working. It was very difficult for me to like keep my space in order because my brain wasn't in order.
Yeah.
My brain was chaotic.
Mhm.
My emotions were all over the place and very suppressed. And so was my environment. So was my bedroom. So was my car. So was whatever.
Right.
And it made it very, very difficult for me to kind of pop out of the system and pursue and grow. And there was a lot of tension with that for me because I'm also hyper ambitious. I've got
Mhm.
big dreams. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm very creative. I'm very expressive. And like I want all of these things for my life. And that was part of the tension early on in our relationship where we were like, we knew very, very quickly within communicating with each other that, like, hey, we're going to get married. Like, this is amazing. We love each
Mhm.
other. We're so good together. But like you said, there's a shit ton that we've got to work out.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot that needs to be worked out. And it was that tension that kind
A
of,
lot of pain.
a lot of pain.
That's all it was. It was
Yeah.
so much pain on both sides, and
Yeah. And so I remember there was a few situations that we kind of, without going, again, there's a lot that we could talk about, but without
Mhm.
going into all of the details, where it kind of came to a place of like, if we don't work these things out emotionally, and if, like, I remember you told me, like, if you don't get healing in this area,
Mhm.
we can't be together. And
Mhm.
I want to be together. Like, we love each other so much,
Yeah.
but I can't deal with this form of communication, with this insecurity, and with this anxiety that's keeping us from actually growing and becoming stable and becoming strong together and becoming a unit.
Mhm. I think we both knew that, like, it wasn't going to work
Yeah.
if we didn't.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I definitely remember having that conversation with you that kind of came out in the form of an ultimatum,
Yeah.
but not in an ugly way. It was just like
It's
like you
just the
just said,
reality
like,
of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is not going to work.
Yeah.
We won't, like, as much as we love each other and are in love, it isn't enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is crazy to say, but, like, love on its own, unfortunately, it doesn't. You
Yeah.
have to work out the ugliness in
Yep.
you, you
Yep.
know, the ugly stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of moving beyond the love and even the lust of a young
Mhm.
relationship too. And we were together for about 3.5 years before we actually got married. 3 to 3.5
I
years.
think it was 3, right?
Yeah, probably
I
about.
always say 3.
Well, okay, so we like talked for like six
Oh,
months.
yeah.
We talked for like, and again, so many things could be
Mm.
so many other episodes, but we
Mhm.
talked for like 6 months before we actually started dating, and we
True,
dated
yeah.
for about almost exactly 3
Okay.
years or just
Yeah,
over 3
you're right,
years.
you're right.
So 3 to 3.5 years ish.
Officially 3, but
Officially
yeah.
3. But yeah, I mean, it was, yeah, we knew very early on, but like you said, there's so much that needed to be worked out.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, that was kind of the start of introducing me, again, coming from this very religious place
Yeah.
of course, I want to pray through things. I
Right,
want
right.
to, seek counsel from people and pastors and whoever that, maybe have some wisdom in this area. And then being like, man, there's brain stuff, like there's things stuck in me
For
that
sure.
need to be
Deep dug
unlocked,
neural
deep
pathways.
dug neural pathways that
Yes.
are nearly impossible to hop out of.
You can't do that by yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
It's impossible. And I knew that because I was like, I've freaking tried.
Oh,
I've prayed all the
yes.
prayers. I've done all the talk therapy.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Yeah. It's kind of like I was like, there's something physically that won't let me. I mean, I remember
Mhm.
needing to go to a meeting for a martial art class to like pursue opening another class at a different school and like doing these
Mhm.
things and the crazy increased heart rate. And just
Mm.
like I'd be sitting in my
Just like
car
hijacks you.
counting down the seconds till I had to get
Oh.
out and my hands are on the steering wheel, white knuckled, like so anxious
Yeah.
just to like talk to someone like, hey, would you be
Yeah.
willing for me to teach classes here? Like, and I remember it's like there's one situation I can remember that I can talk about very briefly. Is like I went to pursue teaching another class at a martial arts school and helping them with their programs. And that situation, white knuckle, counting down, I'm sweating, I'm so anxious. And I went in to talk to the people, and the guy I needed to meet with wasn't there. He wasn't able to actually come in. And like, maybe we can set up another call or something like that. And I was like, absolutely, like left. And I was just so relieved that I didn't actually have to talk to the guy. And this self-sabotage affected my whole life.
Yeah.
And so every situation, every opportunity for growth and success that came my way always had that self-sabotage attached to it, where
That's
I
so
would
sad.
be relieved that I didn't have more to do. I didn't have to have the
You were
conversation.
relieved that, like, it didn't work.
I'd rather be stuck.
Yeah.
Like, it was so much more comfortable, so much more familiar.
And then you had the excuse.
Yeah, and I had the excuse.
Yeah.
I was like, I mean, I tried.
Yeah.
I
It's
didn't
not my
not try.
fault.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
went. I set up the meeting. I went and talked to them. He wasn't there, so it's his fault.
Yeah,
His
yeah.
fault I don't have money right now.
Right.
And man, that circumstance played out over and over and over in my life. So many different things that I could go on about. But man, and like you said, that's probably where our story connects a little bit more. We found EMDR, found neurofeedback, and speaking for myself was, and I've had conversations with people in my family and with you and with your dad, and like dramatic difference.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, with one of the ways that I understood EMDR as well was its ability to separate. You talked about this briefly, but the reality of a situation and the emotions that are attached to it, which is a lot of what happens within REM sleep.
Right.
And so I would think of these situations within family of like where a situation maybe where there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of tension, or there was yelling, there was a fight, there was something.
Yeah.
I'd think about that situation, and I can remember the situation.
Right.
I can remember it clearly, but when I think about it, I'm not back in that place. Like
Right.
my heart rate doesn't come up. You know, my palms don't get sweaty when I think about this fight or some circumstance
You're
that
not
would have.
right back there.
I'm not right back
Yeah.
there again. And
It's not carrying the weight of that trauma with you.
yeah.
Literally. It separates the it's I'm glad you brought that up, because it separates what EMDR does, separates the
Reality.
emotion
Yeah.
from the event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's very
that
powerful.
is game changing. Like imagine like if you can think of circumstances in your life, like traumatic events in your life, and it can be anything. It can be fights with family, it could be issues with parents or with friends. It can
Anything. There's so many things.
there's so
like,
many things. It can be trauma, death, infidelity, anything.
there's even things that like maybe people would be like, oh, surely it's not that. But like for some reason your psyche has held on to it. You know, and it's okay. Like it doesn't have to make sense, because most of it doesn't.
Yeah. And
But
so one of the
working
things that
through
was really powerful for me with EMDR is it cut off the entire branch of those emotions that were attached to situations. So a lot of like you might think like I need to go into all of these memories to like tackle them. And it was like I dealt with this like neural pathway that was affecting all of these other things, like a situation with family that was, you know, attacking a quarter of my life and the decisions that I was making. And I dealt with that root cause of it and allowed myself to process through what was happening and make sense of it in my mind and in my spirit.
Yeah.
And it cut that whole branch off.
Right.
I didn't have to go through every memory of family or something like that.
So powerful.
Really, really powerful. And I was able to get access through that. So at this time, and we fully acknowledge the expense that comes with these therapies. Like it can be extremely, extremely expensive. So that's one thing I can speak to, because at the time I wasn't making money. I mean, I had a job. I'm not saying I was broke, but like I had some income coming in, but I was not making very much money at all.
Yeah, no, we were both like teenagers or like
early,
early
19, 20 years old, you know, you know, making either minimum wage or close to it. And so
I was
didn't
making like 12.
Yeah, I'm making 12 an
or
hour. And I had a
something.
few Taekwondo classes at the time. That's when I was 18, I started doing my fitness training. So I was doing a couple boot camps.
But yeah, definitely not. Especially like you lived out far and had to pay for gas and had to pay for a car and all that.
Yeah. So I definitely didn't have resource to it. So to spend $175 a session for EMDR at some high level place. So I was able to go to, at least here, I don't know if it's common everywhere else, but
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's tools everywhere.
yeah, you gotta look, you gotta,
I do know
do
that
your
there
research,
are
yeah.
certain therapists like everywhere that will work on a sliding
Right.
scale.
So
So,
I did something with what was called an ecumenical center here, and I do think those operate in different cities and stuff, or some
yeah.
version of it. So look it up, do some research. It does take some effort, but
Mhm.
with this place, I was able to operate on a sliding scale
Mhm.
where I could
Yeah, same
pay.
here. I mean,
Yeah, same with you,
yeah.
where I could pay like $50 a session, and at least go like once a week, and it was a manageable amount, $200 to $250 a month,
Mhm.
as opposed to 800 a month to try to
Totally.
go through these therapies.
Yeah.
And so I was able to do some individual therapy, some EMDR, some somatic stuff, some family tree stuff on
Mhm.
my own, separate from you, and be able to afford it in whatever capacity
Mhm.
I could. And your dad was very generous in connecting us with these places and
Yeah.
giving us some of the resources in order to facilitate these connections.
Mhm.
And so that's something I would highly recommend doing in your city, wherever you are. Do some research, look it up, and try to find some places that work on a sliding
Mhm.
scale, some therapists that do EMDR that work on a sliding scale so you can get some reasonable coverage.
Yeah,
That was huge. That was huge
for
for
sure.
me. And so I did that for a while, worked through a lot of these memories and these tensions, these anxieties that I had. Even after that, I felt like it was night and day,
Yeah.
like different person. I could call people and
Right.
not freak out. And if you know my family and you
Yeah.
know me, like calling's the worst thing that you can do. Literally,
Yeah.
like in my family growing up, unless you're my dad had no problem like calling and chewing out Dish Network or something if they were like their channels weren't there or something. He
Yeah.
would call and chew 'em out for 45 minutes to get the deal or something. That was no problem, but and then everything else, like calling is probably the worst thing that could happen to you if you had to make a phone call with someone. There's so much anxiety attached to it. Don't have to deal with that anymore. Even just that, from a business perspective, being able to
Oh, yeah,
communicate
you
with
would not
people.
have lasted that
Oh my
long.
gosh, yeah,
There's no way.
you can't do anything if you can't just talk to people.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so that was a big thing there. And then with neurofeedback, that was another game changer, but same thing. Neurofeedback can be extremely expensive. It can be a lot. And so I was able to get access to a program through a local college here called
Mhm.
UTSA,
Mhm.
where they're training people in neurofeedback. They're
Yeah.
licensing people,
Mark
or
Jones,
yeah,
yeah.
with Mark Jones. And so you are able to still get your cue. You're still
Mhm.
able to go through this full process and get a custom protocol for your brain and the brain mapping that they
Mhm.
did, and go through the full protocol, and it's
Yeah.
free,
Yep.
absolutely free. I
It's
mean,
students. It's
yeah, it's
just but
students.
it's overseen by Dr. Jones.
Exactly. All
Yeah.
the protocols are still looked at by Dr. Jones,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
so and
no,
I
it's a great way. It's
incredible program because
uh-huh.
there is no possible way that I could
Yeah,
afford $3,000-$4,000 or whatever it is
for
to
sure.
actually go through a full protocol with
Right.
neurofeedback.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to say is like something we're very passionate about is it not being um a special thing. Like
Yeah,
I want to increase access to these therapies
for sure.
and I don't want it to be like a privileged thing.
Right.
Um so that's something we're very passionate
Yeah.
about.
So I'm extremely grateful for the Ecumenical Center with
Mhm.
the EMDR, for UTSA and the access they gave me for neurofeedback. So again, encourage you, look up programs that might
Yeah.
be in your area, local colleges or community colleges or whatever it may be. Even online now, maybe there's some options. Neurofeedback, that'd be a little bit different.
Yeah. I mean
But
I can share the specific website.
sure, we can maybe link them in a bio
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
something, or in a comment. But yeah, I mean, with those two things, it was really game changing for me. Like I feel like, you know, 5 years ago, I was a different person. And I'm just dramatically different in the way that
Mhm.
I operated the
Probably a little more than 5 years by now.
little, yeah, maybe, yeah,
It's
probably
already
more
like
like 6.
2022, yeah.
Yeah, gosh, it's so crazy.
Or it's going to be
Almost like
2023.
2023.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably 6.5 years ago, because it was before we got married.
Yeah.
But just a different person in the confidence that I had in myself, the clarity that I had to make decisions and be confident and secure in them, whether
Mhm.
they were right or wrong decisions. I could just walk that
Yeah.
out
You could
with a
just be
sense of
free
clarity. Yeah. Just dramatically different person.
for sure. Something else I want to touch on that we don't have to go too deep into is, but that I do want to recognize is that we've both always had some kind of spiritual walk and
Yeah.
or like relationship with God, a higher power. Um, and I do personally feel like that is just important. It's important to have something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we met in Christian church and we were involved for so long in that realm. We are not in that place anymore.
Yeah.
I don't really know if I consider myself a Christian right now. I don't really care to like define it. I do personally believe in Jesus just because of the like very real encounters
Sure.
and relationship and experiences I've had with him specifically. Um, but yeah, religion just isn't really anything to me right now. But I do just want to recognize that that relationship with God played a big part in our marriage and in
Absolutely.
our relationship as well.
Yeah.
And so in between all this, also we had a relationship with God and specific encounters here and there that were
Yeah.
like life
Yeah.
changing as well.
Absolutely.
And I
Absolutely.
just wanted to touch on that because I feel like it can easily get overlooked or become too religious.
Sure.
I think we easily step into like, okay, well then I have to define this and I have to make sense of this and like it doesn't have to be any of that.
Yeah.
Like to me God is not like easily defined
Yeah.
at all. I
Yeah.
think that's what I do know is
Yeah.
that he doesn't fit in any little box or any perfectly curated thing
Yeah.
or even the Bible or anything like that. And so um yeah, but I just did want to touch on that
Yeah.
that like this was also a big part of our journey and really helped us mentally, emotionally.
Yeah.
Um there was a lot of things that led to more trauma when it comes to like the church stuff. But
That's a whole other
that's
podcast.
a whole other conversation that
Yeah.
I don't care to get into at all right now.
Yeah.
Um
Again.
the good part
Yeah.
of what I wanted to focus on was the relationship with God.
Yeah.
Having a higher power is something very important, I feel,
Yeah.
and it really can be a really good and nice outlet
Yeah.
to have a kind of like some kind of prayer, meditation, you know, some kind of quiet time and worship
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
I think it can also keep you like very grounded and humble.
Yeah.
I think especially as like you pursue healing and you overcome a lot of these obstacles and you grow in your healing and your
Yeah.
ability to express and all these things to kind of get up on yourself a little bit. And I think believing that it's in service of people and it's in service of what's around you and it's in
Mm,
service of nature and it's in
yeah.
service of God that you are finding this healing. It
Yeah.
actually is for the
It
betterment
serves the
of the
greater
world.
good. Exactly.
Yeah, then it,
Yeah.
it, it humbles you. It kind of makes you smaller and it
Yes.
makes you
It's a good ego check.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
makes you insignificant and very significant at the same time,
Totally.
which to me is like what humility is.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big part of it too.
For sure. So I feel like that's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Like leave off on. I I know that we'll have so many more conversations about all this. If you guys have any questions for us, please let us know. As always, you know where to find us. Our DMs are always open. We're
Yeah.
always happy to talk about this stuff. I have reached out to so many random people and strangers on Instagram. Anytime I come across a comment that is somebody just struggling, like I will DM them and I've made friends. Like I
Yeah.
have a really good friend that's in San Diego now. Shout out to you, Joy. We're like pretty good friends now and we met through Instagram and I think it's
Yeah.
really cool and she started doing some of these therapies too and so maybe having someone like her on or something in the
Yeah.
future just to hear different perspectives and different mental health journeys and
100%.
yeah. It's a really good topic though. We
Yeah.
can go on and
On
on
and
for
on.
hours about it because we're so passionate about it and because it's been such a big part of our stories. And we just want everyone to experience that
Yeah.
freedom. We want everyone to know that there is hope and there is a light.
Yeah.
Like just trust when I say that. I
Yeah.
didn't know that that was possible, and so I just want to encourage you, like, it is possible to feel better and to get out of the pit that you feel like you're in.
Yeah, like, it's so hard before you do any of these things to see that it could possibly actually make anything different. And that's the
Yeah.
way, I mean, I grew up like you said, like, therapy was always kind of a voodoo thing. It
Mhm.
was kind of like a waste of time and money. Like
It's like people who are on a psychotic break,
yeah,
like,
yeah, like
or
crazy
something.
people go
Yeah,
get
yeah.
therapy. You are fine.
And I was crazy.
Yeah, right.
Like, I
Right. I was
was
manic
really
at times.
struggling.
Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I was suicidal, and, like, okay, well, what would you, like, be put on suicide watch, or would you
Right.
be just put in a mental institute? Like, that is what the world or whatever,
Mhm.
like, what society would say happens, but it doesn't have to get to that point,
Right.
you know?
Right. Like, you can
And you
bite
don't
it
have to
early.
feel insane
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're not. You're really normal,
Yeah. So just
honestly.
know there is, like, legitimately, like, you can change, and the anxiety that you think is normal and all of the things that you have familiarized yourself with in your life that are negative don't have to be there. There are options, there are tools and opportunities out there to help you. And I'm first person speaking through that of, like, being incredibly anxious and coming to the other side and not being as anxious, and my
Yes.
voice dropping and my ability to just
Mhm.
breathe and talk to people and communicate clearly and not feel all of the
Yeah.
sweatiness and the high heart rate and, like, all of the
Totally. The
stuff.
hijackings.
Yeah, the self-sabotage, all of those things have allowed us to have the capacity, like we talked to full circle at the very beginning, of having all of these different businesses and have creative endeavors and
Mhm.
not lose our minds in the midst of it. It's very difficult. It's been
Yeah.
extremely trying, but we've been okay within our marriage, and we've
Oh,
been
yeah.
okay within our mental health and way we can actually
Mhm.
process, we can actually sit through these things and not feel like we're going crazy.
Yes.
And that's incredibly powerful.
The last thing I'll say is that I know it can be really difficult to just be vulnerable, like,
Yeah,
to admit
for
that you're
sure.
not okay and to admit that you need help. Those things are very difficult, and I think we all grew up um in echo chambers that did say, like, you're weird or you're crazy if you
Mm,
need help, and that's just not true. And so I want to encourage you to just be bold the one time and make the call, or, you know, look up the
set the
therapist,
appointment.
like, yeah, set the
Yeah.
appointment and just take it one step at a time, because it is possible to feel better. And then just do it again and again and again, and,
Yeah.
like, you will be okay. And is it hard to be vulnerable? Yeah, but is it worse to
Oh,
be like a victim
stuck
or a
and
slave to your own life and
mhm.
be hijacked and on autopilot? It's way, way, way worse. You can do it. You can be
Yeah.
vulnerable and honest
And it's
and
so worth it.
authentic with where you're at. Yeah.
So worth any, I mean, I was able to find reasonable options, but it was a very high price for me to pay then. It was still 10, 15% of my income that I
Yeah.
didn't necessarily feel like I had, but
And there was a lot of sacrifice. I mean, it's
beyond
uncomfortable, and
beyond worth it.
it was a little bit nerve-wracking, and sometimes I just really didn't want to go and I dragged my feet, but but I did it.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud that we
Yeah.
did. And I'm glad that we
Look at
did.
us 5.5 years later.
Yeah, and really, I mean, we have a mug that says "Forever Newlyweds." It's kind of our thing, just like we'll always be newlyweds, or we'll
Mhm.
always be as happy as newlyweds. Because there were so many people that told us, like, "Oh, just wait until year one is over. Wait until
Mhm.
the honeymoon's over, the honeymoon phase or whatever.
Right.
Wait until year three. Wait until okay, but if you get to year 7 or 10, like, you're gonna feel it, like." And so we always just combated those with, like, we're
Mm.
gonna be forever
Yeah,
newlyweds.
yeah,
And
and to literally be in a place that legitimately, like, I honestly mean it, that we're
yeah,
closer and more
yeah,
in love and communicate better and are more intentional with our time with each other
hmm
than ever before, than even on our honeymoon, like, just,
we
like,
say it all the
it's
time,
so
but just when you
crazy.
think it can't get better, it does.
Yeah,
And somehow I love you more, and somehow the next day I love you even more, and, like, it just doesn't make any sense.
yeah,
But the only thing that does is the tools that got us
yeah,
here.
100%. Your ability to I mean, because since then, since being married, we've dealt with extreme trauma and extreme circumstances that have been wild and not easy to deal with at all within our businesses, within relationships. It's been crazy, but we have tools to be able to process through those things. Our brain knows how to ride that wave of this is anxiety inducing, come back to level, figure it out, breathe, be, and move forward.
Yeah.
And that's life changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's a good place to
Me too.
stop for sure this time.
Round 2.
Thank you guys for joining us. As always, we really appreciate you just listening and caring at all what we have to say and what we have to talk about. And I hope you found some kind of encouragement in this.
Value.
And if you did, please engage with our stuff. Let us know by leaving a comment, liking it, sharing it, saving it, doing all those fun things, and subscribing to our YouTube channel.
Yes. Leave us a 5-star review on podcast apps. I don't know if Spotify, I think Spotify does it now too, but like Apple Podcasts, leave 5 stars.
We're on all the social medias. We're on TikTok. We're on Instagram.
Yeah.
We're trying to get better at YouTube Shorts, that kind of thing. But yeah, we really appreciate your engagement with our stuff, and we will see you next time.
Peace.